Jimmy, was another guy that really didn't drink that much. If you had to work for somebody, Jimmy is the kind of a guy you want to work for. He's what you would call a boss's boss. I worked for him on many occasions. He was a construction superintendent. He was the epitome of what I refer to as a man's man. He was a straight shooter, always upfront guy, and if you had a pat on the back coming, you got a pat on the back from him. And if you had a kick in the ass coming, you got a kick in the ass coming. If he had anything to say to you or about you, he said it right to your face, not secondhand. Just a hell of a guy. He handled a very large construction crew, of which I was a member of many times. And we always, right after the war, worked out of town a lot, where we'd be at home, away from home for a couple of weeks at a crack and then just get home on the weekends. So we'd sort of pole up in these strange little towns in the Middle West where we had never been before. And we used to pick out one saloon, which sort of become our headquarters, And the place we hung out was right there on Highway 41, just on the south end of Marinette. As you come into Marinette, there was a place called the Club Rio. Just a little working man sort of bar. And we used to hang out in Clarence's, and that was our headquarters. And I can remember Jimmy would come in there. We'd get in there at about 25 minutes to 5 every night. It took us about 5 minutes from the job site to get to this tavern. We'd all come up in a big truck. And we'd be in there maybe 15 minutes, and then in would walk Jimmy. He'd come in, and we'd all be packed around this bar and sitting along little tables around, and he'd take out a wad of money, and he'd put it down on the bar like that. And he'd say, "Clarence, don't take any money from any of my guys until that's all gone." And then he'd say, "See you tomorrow, fellas," and out he'd go. Never would have a drink in there with us. Now, I knew he drank. Everybody there knew he drank, And I just couldn't understand why the hell he wouldn't drink. And these guys would have died for him because he'd done the things that we had to have done for us. And I'm talking about those days right after World War II when a lot of us hadn't grown up yet. We were still fresh from a war, still a little wild, and our sense of values was a little distorted because what I thought was fun in those days, was going out and getting your face smashed in at the dance hall and getting 3 of your teeth knocked out and a black eye and a sprained knee, I'd say, boy, we had one hell of a time last night, And then we'd wind up in jail or we'd have damages laid against us for doing this or doing that. But Jimmy always would get these things straightened out. He'd talk to the cops and then he'd make restitution here and then we'd have to pay him back. And he just got everybody out of a lot of scrapes. But I couldn't understand why he wouldn't drink with us. And I asked him that one day and he told me something that was about the first bit of knowledge that I ever got about alcoholism. He said, "Duffy," says, "there'd be nothing better that I'd like," he says, "than to drink with you guys, on the weekend and have fun." He always used to go, laugh at us, at what you guys call fun. He says, "But I'm a little older than you and I've been around a little bit longer." And he says, "I know what would happen." He says, "That booze sort of makes you crazy sometimes." And he says, "If I'm around you guys over the weekend and getting drunk," he says, "it would almost be inevitable that during the weekend I'd say something to you that I wish I didn't say, or you'd say something, or we'd get in a fight, or I'd fire you, or you'd quit." He says, "So the best thing is for the boss to stay the hell away from the troops." Now that's sort of a code in the military. Everybody knows that. The enlisted men are always separated from the officers and any kind of an experience, just for that particular reason. So I used to say to Jim, "Well, then what the hell are you doing?" He says, "I find my own places." And he did, because he was a heavy drinker. He used to like to play a card game called euchre. He used to talk about that euchre all the time. And he always find a saloon where they played that. And he'd drink up a storm. Boy, he was certainly no angel. But he was a pro. He knew how to get well. At least he thought he knew how to get well. Because he knew about B1 shots, B12 shots. He knew about tranquilizing drugs. He knew about Seconal and Nimbutal and sleeping pills and things like that. And he knew that on a Sunday morning, if he could get to a doctor's office and get a double shot of vitamin B and get a couple of Seconal, he could sleep it off for the rest of the day. And he'd be on the job Monday morning. He'd probably be sicker than a bitch. But he'd be there to perform and to function. And we were never aware of all of these things he had to go through to do this. And he wound up at an AA meeting when we were building 2 projects at the same time. And Jimmy was the superintendent on both of those jobs. I don't know how many millions of dollars were involved there, but there was about 800 men working on them jobs, who were company men. I'm not talking about the subcontractors. I'm talking about an 800-man payroll to Rowley Burst Corporation, who was our immediate boss, you know. And Jimmy was in charge of that whole shebang. He went back and forth between both jobs, which was a little over 150 miles between them. One day he'd be at Marquette, and the next day he'd be at Sioux, and then he'd be back to Marquette. And he knew how to handle things, and he was very valuable. Well, his story goes that one day after work, he was leaving work, and he went into a saloon, which I guess 50 million guys will do today after work. Nothing odd about that. Going in to get a couple of drinks after your work. And he said he was on his way up to the Sioux, and he said, stopped in, have a couple of drinks, get a pack of cigarettes. He said he was sitting at the bar, and a guy alongside of him was a salesman type. Said, you want a shake for a drink? He said, so we shook for a drink. And he said, I won. So he said, then we shook to let him get a chance to get even. Then the bartender got in, and we shook him. He says, I don't know. He said, we had about 5 drinks. That's what he said. Now, I can't speak for nobody but myself. I don't really think 5 drinks sets you squirrely if you're in the habit of drinking every day. I don't think you're going to go into DTs or you're going to go crazy or anything like that. 5 shots of a bottle of beer at a time. Sort of an appetizer. That's all he had. Then he got up to leave because he knew he had to make this 150-mile drive. But then his story began to have holes. Holes that only other alcoholics would recognize. Because he come on with this crap. You know, he got picked up by the Michigan Highway Patrol for erratic driving under the influence of alcohol. And he said, you know what happened? He said, it wasn't the booze. He says, as I was going up the highway, I went to light a cigarette. And he said, I dropped the damn cigarette on the floor. And he said, so I bent down to pick up the cigarette and I was driving. I have told that story to every cop in the Middle West, you know. And so has every other drunk told that story. And he said they didn't buy it, you know, and they took away his license because that's mandatory then. Well, that represented a hell of a problem to him because he had to tell the company then that he couldn't go back and forth between these 2 jobs. And that was embarrassing, and they didn't like it one bit because they knew it was going to probably cost them some kind of money. And they didn't want to lose him. We were 75% through the job, so they wanted him to finish both of them. So they hired a laborer whose special job was to be chauffeur to Jimmy. Just drive him back and forth in a pickup truck. And they said, if you let drinking interfere with your work anymore, we're going to blackball you in the business. So Jimmy said, Jesus, don't worry about it. He said, I'll quit, and he said, I'll even go to that AA. Because by this time I was on AA, and there was a few other guys on the job on AA, and Jimmy knew about AA. But he didn't come to any of us. He went to a sheet metal worker by the name of Lionel Beaumier, who was from Gladstone, Michigan. And Lionel brought Jimmy to his first AA meeting, and I was sitting there. And he said the same thing that a million other people have said at their first meeting. He said, well, my name is Jim, and I don't really believe I'm an alcoholic, but I just came here to see what it was all about. And none of us said anything. We just sort of smiled a little bit. And next week he came back to the meeting with Lionel. He said, well, my name is Jim, and he said, I'm glad I'm here because chances are if I kept on drinking, I'd eventually become an alcoholic. And we all sort of smiled a little bit. The next week he came back and he said, well, my name is Jim, and there might have been a few times back in my past that I was an alcoholic. And we all smiled. Well, eventually, after about 6 weeks, you know, he inched his way all the way up to it. Finally, he said, well, my name is Jim, and I guess I'm an alcoholic, you know. But here was a guy who 80% of his life, you know, was top man as far as I'm concerned in this field, and just a couple of little minor incidents brought him to AA. If you have to work for somebody, Jimmy is the kind of a guy you want to work for. He's what you would call a boss's boss. I worked for him on many occasions. He was a construction superintendent.